Doc Holliday is probably my second favourite character from American history.
Well, who's your favourite?
Daniel Boone. I love the story of Daniel Boone.
Daniel Boone.
He's one of the original frontiersmen from generations before this.
Well, we'll talk about him another time then.
Yeah, okay. I love his story. But Doc Holliday, again, I'm not really going out on a limb. Most people that like the Wild West, because I love a old John Wayne film.
Yeah, everyone does.
Anyone that likes the Wild West gravitates towards Doc Holliday. He's sort of undeniably a brilliant character.
Right.
He's been played loads there's been lots of films. Obviously Tombstone, 1993 Tombstone, where Val Kilmer plays him.
Yeah, I remember. That's the only one I really remember.
He was also played by Dennis Quaid. I nearly said Randy Quaid then. That would have been very different. He was played by Dennis Quaid in the film White Earp that came out at the same time. But he's been played by loads of people. Cesar Romero, the original, do you know him? The original Joker from the Adam West Batman. He played Doc back in like the 30s or something.
Right, okay.
It's been played by Kirk Douglas in the great gunfight at the OK Corral. That's one of the real classics. There's another film, Hour of the Gun. It's just, but as we said already, there is loads of myth-making and storytelling. So some of this, if anyone's out there who really, really knows their Wild West stuff and the life and times of Doc Holliday and the Earp brothers, I may say something where you might think, oh, that's not quite right, or I've heard something different. Well, again, just like when we're doing a Plutarch or something, there's quite often more than one story. They don't even agree exactly how old he was when he died, but he did die young, so he's got that sort of John Lennon thing going on. He's only about 36 when he died.
Right.
And that's a big part of his story, that he was sort of dying of TB his whole adult life, really.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of a big part of his story, but we'll get into all of that.
Okay.
So the thing to mention is that his story is wrapped up with that of Wyatt Earp and the Earp brothers.
Yeah.
There was loads of Earp brothers.
Right.
There's like 5 important ones, but I think there was more. I think he had 8 siblings in all, not all boys.
Right.
But there's the oldest one, Virgil, and then there's Morgan Earp.
Yeah.
In fact, Doc Holliday was really, really, really close friends with Morgan Earp, who's played by Bill Paxton in Tombstone. They was pretty much drinking buddies, almost inseparable for a while. Because Doc Holliday is a gambler and a gunslinger. You wouldn't think he'd be friends with lawmen, because the Earp brothers are lawmen, that's what they are, like sheriffs and US marshals and stuff. That's their story.
Yeah.
And it all culminates, well, it doesn't even culminate, but there's a massive shootout. The most famous shootout in the Wild West is at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona. And Doc Holliday's involved in
I didn't even realise it was real, to be honest. I just thought this was American myth-making.
Oh, no.
This is, I didn't even realise it was really based on true events.
Yeah, no, it's
I never looked into it.
It's sort of well documented.
Right. Okay.
And that's one of the things why, as a historian, it's good, because as a real history nerd, you sort of want to get to what really happened. And so, maybe now is a really good time just to mention some of the sources.
Yeah, the sources are going to be like various Wild West magazines, aren't they? Like
newspapers at the time. Yeah, no, absolutely. So there's places like the True West magazine, the Dallas Weekly Herald, the Denver Republican, the Rocky Mountain News, the Leadville Daily Democrat, the Tucson Star,
a bunch
the
of
Dodge
these probably
City
still
Times.
exist.
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
San Francisco Inquirer sounds like something I've recognised.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if it still exists.
Yeah.
But yeah, so loads of it is sort of well documented. And like, for example, the shootout at the OK Corral was witnessed by loads of people. And, they write letters and they write memoirs and they get interviewed after, because it was famous at the time.
Well, I mean, it would be, wouldn't it?
Even at the time, back east.
I remember
in New York and Boston, everyone was talking about it.
I remember watching a documentary a while ago. That was about the Wild West and how actually it wasn't quite as wild as everyone makes out. The number of actual gunfights was very, very low. And so one giant one at the OK Corral would of course make headlines everywhere, because this is huge. This is major news. And that's presumably why it's famous. Yeah.
I mean, that's true. It depends where you were and when. Sure. So they had things called boomtowns. And in fact, Tombstone, Arizona was a perfect example of a boomtown where there's nothing there. And then someone in this case, in Tombstone, they found it was a silver mine. They found a seam of silver in the hills.
Yeah.
And so suddenly, literally within 3 years, it went from nothing to like a few thousand people, and there's all saloons and all sorts of things going on. In a slightly earlier age, because here we're talking about the shootout at the OK Corral was 1881. But in 1849, there was sort of a gold rush, the 49ers. You had lots of boom towns spring up. And then quite often they would just disappear again after the natural resources are gone, they'll sort of just be left. But yeah, so Tombstone in Arizona is one of those. So just to try and set the scene for a doc, I've got a few sort of quotes from different people. Still just on the sources. One of the big ones is Wyatt Earp. So Wyatt Earp himself survived all of this. He lived to be, I think in his 80s, lived to be an old man.
Really?
Yeah, okay. In the early 20th century. He lived into the early 20th century. And he wrote his memories and things. And another guy who's really important, Bat Masterson was his name. There was the Masterson brothers were also, they were like the Earps. They were like these brothers that were lawmen.
Yeah.
And Bat Masterson's sort of important. He could do a whole thing on him, but he also lived through it all essentially and wrote his recollections about Doc and all this sort of thing.
Yeah. This is cool.
And there was this one guy that called Stuart Lake. You know, it quite often happens with someone important. There's one biography that everyone like dominates it, and everyone's read that one biography. And if that's wrong, then in the popular consciousness, it's sort of wrong for all time or nearly.
Yeah.
You need revisionist historians to say, oh, actually, that's not true and stuff. There's a guy called Stuart Lake who wrote a book called Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal in 1931. Right. And that's what loads of sort of the lore of Doc and Wyatt Earp comes from.
There's a lot of it wrong.
Yeah, well, not a lot of it is wrong, but bits here and there are like, that couldn't have happened. Doc can't be in two places at once. That's one of the main things about Doc Holliday is that he's said to have been in loads and loads and loads of different places, and he certainly travelled around the Midwest, but he couldn't have been everywhere at once, sort of thing. You know,
the thing I find interesting about this is just the names are so cinematic, like they just roll off the tongue that just sound like they're made for movies. You know, it's crazy. You know.
Yeah, there's loads of great names in this.
Yeah.
At one point, I'll name the Clayton Gang. They're like sort of the arch.
Sound great. The Clayton Gang. It feels real, you know.
The Clayton Boys and Old Man Clayton.
Yeah.
At one point, I will list that's basically the names of their gang. They called themselves the Cowboys. And they're just like classic Wild West names, really. And one thing I'll say real quick is the Wild West, the historians of it, sort of always talk about or argue, when did it start and when did it end? That's one of the things.
Wow.
In my opinion, and this just is my humble opinion, is that the Wild West sort of ends when Doc Holliday dies.
Really?
That's just my opinion. Because
in 1887.
Yeah, by that point they've got sort of electric lighting.
Right.
And just
telegraph.
Right, yeah. When I started playing Red Dead Redemption 1, I realised it was set in 1911 or something. I'm thinking, it's a bit late.
Yeah, because that's the thing, isn't it? A lot of mythology is because of distance, right? And it's like, okay, this happened, and we've got like an account that filters through so many different people, none of which have been, present at the place, that it becomes this kind of legendary story that we bring to it the sort of moral aspects of it that make it memorable, right? And that, so we're like, right, okay, we like that guy, he's the hero, he's the villain. Whereas like as soon as you've got like real time, like on the ground reporting, like the age of Twitter is nothing can be mythologized anymore because there's just a video of it going around and everyone's seen the video instantly, and it's the same thing with telegraphs. Like, right, we've got a first-hand report from the day it happened in, on the other coast of the United States. Well, there's no mythology now. It doesn't filter through a bunch of different people who never had any first-hand experience of it to put their own sort of moral slant on it, And so I think that's the reason, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, and yet you're absolutely right. And yet saying that still somehow there's loads of, there's still loads of stories where people say, well, could that, when we look back in it, real scholars look back on it and like, that couldn't possibly be the case or... Yeah.
But I think this the sort of Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday sort of generation is the last generation where mythology can really be created. And after that, it's all sort of modern records. Yeah.
When you go back to sort of Alexander, for example, there's such massive scope for it.
Yeah.
Such massive scope.
Builds a giant iron wall to hold back Gog and Magog. It's like, did he? Did he really?
Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like he did. What year was that? No.
Well, one of the things you mentioned there, I think, is interesting is the you mentioned in passing there. The idea where sort of maybe the line is blurred between whether people are sort of just morally good or not. So, for example, Wyatt Earp is...
obviously the good guy.
Right. But he was also fairly undeniably a murderer and a pimp. and a gangster on some level.
Sure, but that probably doesn't get filtered into the Hollywood rendition of it,
right?
Like, he didn't do that in Tombstone, did he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was never convicted. Like I say, he lived to be an old man at liberty. But I mean, he was certainly a pimp at one point.
Right, okay.
Anyways, well, Wyatt Earp wrote this of Doc Holliday: that mad merry scamp. Killed loads of people. That mad merry scamp with the heart of gold and nerves of steel, who in the dark years had followed and stood at my elbow in many a battle to the death. He was a dentist but preferred to be a gambler, and he goes on to say other things, but then ends the sort of famous quote by saying, Doc Holliday was the most skillful gambler and the nerviest, fastest and deadliest man with a 6-gun that I ever saw. So,
you probably saw a few too.
Quick thing on that. Apparently Doc Holliday was very, very fast. Because things like Billy the Kid, there's loads of mythology around Billy the Kid, loads. Sort of blown out of all proportions if you believe all the things that have been said about him. But apparently Doc was very fast on the draw, but not all that accurate.
Right.
If you weren't right in front of him, he'd probably miss you.
Right. Well, I mean, I suppose when you're being really, really quick, well, accuracy suffers, doesn't it?
Yeah. Some other lines just from different historians and writers. He's been called a mixture of elegance and decadence. A gentleman and thug, aristocrat and drunk, a desperate invalid and deadly killer, an outlaw and a hero. Bit more
very interesting character.
Yeah, he is a contradiction of things for sure. A whiskey-soaked, bullet-spinning son of thunder. You don't get much more
these are awesome descriptions.
Western than that. The slickest gunslinger in the West. Bat Masterson said he was not a constructive citizen.
Well, no kidding.
Right.
I mean, I gathered that from the other quotes.
Basically, apparently, because he was well-educated and Southern, he was from Georgia, from near Atlanta, Georgia. And apparently when he was sober, he was very sort of charming and reasonable. Probably
a useful man to have around.
But when he was drunk, he was dangerous. He was sort of really quite dangerous when he was drunk, and he was drunk a lot.
Of course he was.
One last quick quote here, just to sort of set the scene. One historian said, he was a mass of contradictions. He could be charming and smooth. He could be nasty and downright brutal. He drank too much. He could be pathetic, pitiful at times, but he was still the dominant personality in the story. So Wyatt Earp and the Earp brothers are really the main... They're sort of the real main characters, if you like. Doc Holliday's sort of just another character in their story, and yet everyone cares. Everyone loves Doc the most, right?
Well, you get these people with larger-than-life personalities that do that, and he's one of them, clearly.
It seems one of the reasons why I like him, why most people like him, really, is it seems that he didn't care really about death too much.
Yeah,
he was just really fearless. He would just call anyone out, anyone, like the other really, really famous gunslingers. He wouldn't hesitate just to call them out over almost anything.
Maniac.
And you kind of respect, even though it's like it is maniac behaviour, actually. You've also got to respect it, especially in their world. Nowadays, it's a lot more like, okay, I just would never want to be near you then.
Yeah.
But in those days, it's kind of respectable. In a sense.
In a sense, I can see why. You know.
There's something kind of heroic about it.
You're right. All right. Yeah.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.